Howdy. I'm Grey Pilgrim. I wanted to talk about the Netherlands. You may have heard of it, sometimes called the Low Country. The Low Country is basically a bunch of lands that are on the North Sea. And nobody wanted them except these hardy souls who came in and basically built some dikes and then put in some windmills to pump water out and dump it back into the sea. And once the land was dried out, they started farming it. And they turned it into a really beautiful place. And later on, they grew tulips and crops. And now it's one of the bread baskets of Western Europe. Anyway, but they have a long history. Their history goes back, well, to the Neolithic, but let's start around, the War of Spanish Succession. It's a lot of baloney, but basically the Netherlands was composed of two pieces. One was called the Northern Netherlands and the other is the Southern Netherlands. In the south, they were predominantly Catholic. In the north, they were predominantly Protestant. This is right after the Reformation. And basically what happened was the Northern Netherlands became much more industrialized and became traders. They made these beautiful trading ships and were traveling all over the world, trading this for that and that for this, and making lots of money. There's a beautiful painting, I think it was done by Rembrandt, but it's called The Night Watch, and it hangs in the, basically what amounts to the capital of the Netherlands in Amsterdam, and I have a copy of it on a wall in my living room. Of a section of it. It's a huge mural that goes all the way across the wall. But anyway, during the 17th century, they were traveling all over the place and doing a lot of trading, and they went down to a place in Asia called that they called Batavia. And later on, it got named Jakarta and became the capital of Indonesia. But when they were there, they formed a thing called the Dutch East India Company. And the Dutch East India Company was really big on trading things like spices and other exotic goods from the Far East, one of which was Chinese porcelain. And they sort of cornered the market on porcelain, brought it back to Europe, and sold it at a very high markup. Porcelain, by the way, is a really interesting phenomenon. It's just fired clay made to be extremely thin and very, very precious looking and beautiful. And a Ming vase, you may have heard of a Ming vase, that's porcelain. In the Netherlands, they had some clay pots that they made. You know, you'd fire them and then you could use that for cooking in the kitchen. But that's earthenware and it's much more thick and heavy and durable. But it's not to the artwork level of a porcelain Chinese vase. You know how they got them that way? In China, being a potter was sort of a craft that was passed on father to son. And one of the things the father would do was he would go out to his favorite patch of clay by the river, and he would get some clay and he would start kneading it and working it with his hands. And then he would take that clay, and his son would then pick up and start kneading that same batch of clay with his hands and do it. And then his son would take that same batch of clay and then knead it and work it. Meanwhile, each of them would be grabbing some other clay that their other ancestor had just been kneading all day, and they'd make some pots out of it, and they made porcelain. As you knead clay like that, the molecular structure of it is bound together in such a manner that it becomes extremely plastic. I mean, extremely. So that after, say, 150 years of kneading the same clay daily, every day, by multi-generational potters, that clay becomes so elastic, so easy to work with, that when you put a lump of it onto a potter's wheel and start turning it and bringing it up into a pot, you can make it super thin. Well, on top of that, they would then take a special mix of slurry that they would glaze it with. And they would mix that with some animal dyes and some plant dyes that they had. And then they would put an overcoating of slurry over that, fire the whole thing, and then it would come out this beautiful pot that had in that slurry that they put in with the dyes, they would have artists who would paint beautiful painting scenes in the slurry that then would fire up and look just absolutely gorgeous. And some porcelain pots from that period are some of the most valuable ones ever made. Anyway, the Dutch really liked these, and they brought a whole bunch of them back to Europe and sold them for a fortune. They were all the rage in the court of France at the time. And like the Sun King had a huge collection of porcelain. Well, he got them from the Dutch. Anyway, the Chinese got a new emperor, and he was kind of pissed off at the European traders, and he cut off the porcelain trade about 1620. Well, the Dutch, being enterprising people, said, we got all these pots that we brought over, but now we've run out the market is now empty because we can't get any more. What to do? Well, they took some of their potters and started experimenting and making some faux porcelain, basically. And one group of potters were in a little Dutch town called Delft. And in Delft, they started working with this, and they like to make tiles there, porcelain tiles for decorations on the walls of things. And they started trying it with their version of the porcelain pottery. Well, they had one thing that the Chinese didn't. They had a tin glaze that they could put over their pots, and the tin would glaze in with a really beautiful, almost clear and see-through surface. And then they had another substance that they added to that, cobalt chloride. And cobalt chloride makes, when fired, makes extremely solid blue, very similar to porcelain. So that, we have now this white glaze, the tin glaze is white, unless they work it to make it clear and transparent. So they put down a base coat of tin and then color it in with this cobalt chloride. So it became white with a blue scene on it, and they would mimic porcelain. And it became known as Delftware. Now, what do I know about Delftware? Well, as some people know, I live in the Pacific Northwest in Oregon, and I live on family land. Well, just to the east of me, my sister lives in what we call the old house. And the old house has a fireplace in it. And I remember that fireplace as a kid because my grandparents lived in it. And it has, well, first of all, that house was built by our great-great-grandfather. And he was rather prosperous because he had a sawmill up here and was selling lumber into Portland. And they were shipping it off. And while he was in Portland, he thought let's buy some doodads for back home, bolts of cloth for the ladies to make some dresses out of, and that's interesting. Some mahogany. Where'd you get this? Oh, it came across on the last clipper ship. That means it was shipped around the Horn of South America through the Drake Passage by clipper ships. And so he had some mahogany, and he also had some Delftware, some tiles that he bought, and also brought over by a clipper ship. So what he did is he brought those home and used those to build the mantle of his new fireplace. So the top of the mantle is mahogany, and it has 4 Delft tiles embedded into the mantelpiece. And I remember seeing those as a kid, and people would tell me about Delftware. Well, with that in mind, my cousin is he's a scrounge and picks up all kinds of things. And he knows I'm a pipe smoker. So he found and gave me this. And this is kind of a rarity. This is a Delftware pipe. You'll notice it's white with blue. White is the tin glaze, and the blue is the cobalt chloride. And it looks a little bit browned now because it's been smoked, and it's an old pipe. This is very old, and it's got a scene from a windmill in Holland, and what looks like either a canal or a seascape with some ships being brought into the town and around this windmill. Maybe through the Zuider Zee, I'm not sure. But anyway, it's a pretty little scene, and these smudges up here are probably clouds. I know you can't really see it very well, but I think it's rather pretty. And it's also very rare. I will never smoke this because it's just too rare to risk, in my opinion. But anyway, I know about Delftware, but I know about the Dutch. And one thing I like, you also know I collect guns. Well, among other things, I have a Dutch gun. Ooh, and this is it. This is an 1871 Dutch Beaumont. Now, the Beaumont was developed by a fellow by the name of Edouard de Beaumont. And basically what happened was, the Dutch, they'd become the Kingdom of the Netherlands under William of Orange. And when William of Orange took over, he went over to his friends over in Sheffield, England, and said, "Let me buy some rifles from you." And they sold him a bunch of Brown Besses. Well, so he had flintlocks up to plenty when he took over. Well, later on, after Napoleon and all the fracas of the Napoleonic Wars, the Netherlands ended up with the Republic of the Netherlands and the Republic of Belgium. And the Netherlands wanted to get a modern rifle. Well, they were considering the 1871 Mauser and several other versions that were being proposed. I forget the names of them, but I don't have any of those. But I bought one of these. These came in many, many years ago. And most of them were made in Maastricht was the name of the town. They started out making them in Liège, but Liège then became part of Belgium. So Maastricht was where you went. Well, then Maastricht was, other things happened. They moved the armory for these to Liège, and they were making them in Liège. For a while, they made some in France, and they were shipping them over. Beaumont designed it, but he didn't have a factory to build it in. You'll notice one thing. See this extremely fat bolt handle on it? This uses a system that Mauser used on the 1871 Mauser, which is the mainspring is actually contained within the bolt itself. It's a weird design, but it's elegant for its period. This is it has a magazine on it. That's because when this first came out in 1871, it was a single shot. And they decided they really needed something that would shoot more than just one round. Well, they looked around, and in Italy, there was a guy named Vitelli who was selling these. It's a Vitelli magazine. And you can put 4 cartridges in it, and a 5th in the chamber, and they end up with 5 rounds in this thing, which they thought was pretty cool. And then it has this lever here for the magazine cutoff so that you could shoot it one at a time. And at the orders of a officer, the 19th century way of battle. But these came in the 1950s and 60s, some of them. Recently, a bunch more just came in from a stash that was in Ethiopia. Royal Tiger Imports grabbed those and bringing them in. But they're in absolutely awful condition. This one's in pretty good shape. Even the cartouche can be seen on the stock. And the stock says it's made in Delft, which I think is kind of interesting, given my interest in porcelain. But I've also got an interest in guns, so, well, there you go. Anyway, the Netherlands, an interesting place with an interesting history. A lot of it's really wrapped up in the rest of European history. Some good, some not so good. But still, something to think about. That's about all I got to say. Happy trails.